The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, thick and cream-colored, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer. At first, I almost threw it out, assuming it was some kind of spam. But when I glanced at the return address, some posh estate in Vermont, I paused. The envelope was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Andrews. Now, I don't know about you, but in my life, physical letters usually mean one of three things: bad news, a wedding invitation, or an elaborate scam. This one felt different. There was no explanation, no RSVP card, just a handwritten note on heavy stationery. You are cordially invited to an exclusive weekend retreat. Details provided upon acceptance. RSVP immediately. Jessica was in the kitchen making coffee when I showed her the note. "What do you think this is about?" I asked. She barely glanced up. "Probably some marketing gimmick," she replied. "Who sends physical invitations like this anymore?" I said, turning the card over. No email. No QR code. Just an embossed phone number. Should we call? Why not? Jessica shrugged, her tone casual but her eyes betraying a flicker of interest. I dialed the number and was greeted by a silky-voiced woman who confirmed we were selected to attend the event. All expenses paid. It's a retreat for couples, she explained. To reconnect, recharge, and rekindle your bond. That part sounded harmless enough. Jessica seemed intrigued now. Couples retreat, she asked, raising an eyebrow. Think about it, I said. It's been a while since we've done anything together. Might be nice. That Friday, we packed a bag and set out for Vermont. The instructions said to meet at a private helipad, or we'd be flown to the location. A helicopter? My first instinct was to call it off. What kind of retreat needed that level of secrecy? But Jessica was unusually insistent. It'll be an adventure, she said. When we arrived, the estate was unlike anything I'd ever seen: rolling hills, sprawling gardens, and a mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. It was elegant and eerie all at once. A dozen other couples milled around, sipping champagne as staff in white gloves collected our bags. What's the catch? I whispered to Jessica. She laughed. Maybe it's one of those scam timeshares. Let's just enjoy the free food. But by the first evening, something felt off. At dinner, the conversations between the couples felt strained, guarded. The host, a man named Vincent, welcomed everyone with a smile too perfect to be real. By the end of this weekend, you'll leave here knowing the truth, he said cryptically, raising a glass. About yourselves. About your relationships. I glanced at Jessica, but she seemed unbothered, even amused. That night, we were assigned separate rooms, under the guise of individual reflection. Jessica seemed fine with it, almost too fine. She didn't even protest, brushing me off with a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing into her room. I didn't sleep well. Something about the place, the people, it felt calculated, like we were part of a test we hadn't agreed to. The next morning, I was still groggy when I stepped into the breakfast hall. Jessica was already there, sitting at a table, chatting with Vincent. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. And just like that, I felt it, a pang of unease. Something was wrong. But the real twist came after breakfast, when Vincent gathered us all in the grand salon. He clapped his hands, and a projector screen descended from the ceiling. Before we go further, he said, we like to start the weekend by opening the floor for full honesty. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of two people walking through a garden late at night. The angle was low, like it was filmed from a hidden camera. It was Jessica. And Vincent. My heart stopped as the video played on, revealing more than I ever wanted to see. The room fell silent, apart from the faint hum of the projector. I couldn't tear my eyes from the screen. There they were, Jessica and Vincent, walking through the estate's gardens. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just a casual stroll. But then, they stopped. Vincent leaned in close, said something I couldn't hear, and Jessica laughed. Not the polite kind of laugh you'd give a stranger, but the kind she used to give me. Familiar. comfortable, intimate. The camera's perspective changed, zooming in as they moved farther down the path, away from the main house. I sat frozen, every muscle in my body locking up as if bracing for an explosion. Vincent took Jessica's hand, and she didn't pull away. A murmur rippled through the other couples in the room, but I didn't hear their words. My ears buzzed, my chest tightening. The scene on the screen wasn't stopping. They walked farther, disappearing behind a hedge, and the footage cut out. Vincent stood at the front of the room, smiling like he'd just announced a weather forecast. "Let me explain," he began, his tone calm, even smug. "What you just saw is an example of how easily human connections can shift under the right circumstances. But this isn't about judgment, it's about exploration. You're all here to understand yourselves and your relationships better. Think of this as an experiment. An experiment." That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I glanced around the room, my mind racing. Other couples looked just as shocked, but none of them seemed to be in the footage. I turned to Jessica, who sat 2 chairs away, her face frozen in a mask of surprise, or maybe it was guilt. "Is this a joke?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Jessica turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Ryan, Don't," I snapped, holding up a hand. "Not here." Vincent clapped his hands, like he was calling an unruly classroom to order. "I understand this is uncomfortable for some of you, but trust the process. By the end of this retreat, you'll thank me for the clarity." I wasn't thanking anyone for anything. The rest of the day was a blur. Vincent had activities planned, trust-building exercises, private discussions, group therapy sessions, but I wasn't interested. I spent the morning pacing our assigned room while Jessica stayed conspicuously absent. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench with her arms crossed. She looked up as I approached, her expression wary. "We need to talk," I said. Jessica sighed. "Can we not do this here, Ryan? People are watching." "People are watching?" I laughed bitterly. "You should have thought about that before letting someone record you sneaking around with Vincent." Her face hardened. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," I said, crossing my arms. "What was it like?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "It was just a conversation. He was being nice." "I didn't think." "You didn't think," I interrupted. "That's your excuse? You didn't think?" Jessica stood, anger flashing across her face. "Don't twist this into something it wasn't. I didn't do anything wrong." "Didn't do anything wrong?" I echoed. "You held his hand, Jess. You laughed at his jokes like he was your—" I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Like he was my what?" she demanded. "Your husband," I snapped. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jessica looked away, her jaw tight. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. "Am I?" I said, stepping closer. "Because it doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels like you're hiding something. And I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but Vincent's voice interrupted us. "Ah, there you are." We both turned to see him strolling down the garden path, his hands in his pockets and a smug smile on his face. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, his tone laced with false innocence. "Yes," I said flatly. Jessica shifted uncomfortably but didn't say anything. Vincent ignored my tone, his gaze flicking between us. "I wanted to check in, see how you two were processing everything. These weekends can be enlightening, but also challenging." "Spare me the therapy talk," I said. "What the hell is going on here?" Vincent's smile didn't waver. "As I said earlier, this is an experiment. A chance to explore the dynamics of your relationship. By ambushing us with surveillance footage?" I shot back. "You were aware there were cameras on the premises," he said smoothly. "It was in the paperwork you signed." Jessica's eyes widened. You didn't tell me that. I turned to her, my patience snapping. Maybe if you'd spent less time holding his hand, you would have read the fine print. Enough, Jessica snapped, her voice rising. I'm not going to stand here and be attacked for something I didn't do. Didn't do? I took a step closer. Then tell me, Jessica. Why did you agree to come here? And why the hell are you acting like you've got nothing to hide? She hesitated, and that was all the confirmation I needed. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the footage, Vincent's smug grin, and Jessica's evasions over and over like a broken record. By 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of the room, determined to find answers. The estate was quiet, the halls dimly lit. I wandered toward the main building, past the grand dining room and into the study where Vincent had held court earlier. It was empty, but a desk in the corner caught my eye. I opened the drawers, searching for anything that might explain what was really going on here. Papers, guest lists, contracts, none of it added up. But then I found a file labeled Andrews, R&J. Inside was a detailed report. Notes on our behavior, Jessica's work schedule, even snippets of conversations we'd had in private. My blood ran cold as I flipped through page after page of invasive details. At the back of the file was a photo of Jessica and Vincent in the garden, his hand on her shoulder. I stared at the image, my mind racing. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a setup. The following morning, I was waiting for Jessica in the dining hall. Every other couple looked subdued, sipping coffee or picking at their plates in silence. It was as if no one wanted to acknowledge what had happened the day before. I didn't care. The minute Jessica walked in, looking freshly showered and pretending like everything was fine, I waved her over. Sit, I said flatly, gesturing to the chair across from me. Her steps faltered for a moment, but she complied. What's this about? She asked, her tone guarded. I slid the manila folder across the table to her. This. Jessica's face went pale as she opened the file and saw the contents, surveillance photos, detailed notes about her movements, and a printed copy of an email exchange between her and Vincent. What the hell is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. That's what I want you to tell me, I said, leaning in. Why does Vincent have a file on us? Why is there an entire section about you? And more importantly, why does this feel like something you already knew about? Jessica's hands trembled as she closed the folder. I didn't know about this, Ryan. I swear. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You swear? Forgive me if I don't take your word for it. You've been sneaking around, lying about where you've been, and now this? You'll have to do better than swearing, Jessica. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, Vincent appeared in the doorway. Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. I see you're having an important discussion. Jessica immediately closed the folder, her eyes darting between Vincent and me. This isn't the time, she muttered. I think it is, I countered, standing up. Vincent, why don't you join us? You seem to be the man with all the answers. He smiled, unbothered by my tone, and strolled over to our table. If you insist. He took the seat next to Jessica, far too comfortable for my liking. I didn't sit back down. Let's cut the crap, I said, crossing my arms. Why do you have a file on us? Why are there cameras all over this place? And what exactly is this retreat supposed to be? Vincent folded his hands on the table, his expression calm. As I explained before, this is an experiment. The files help us understand each couple's dynamic. The cameras are for observational purposes. None of this is unusual for a retreat of this nature. Observational purposes? I echoed, my voice rising. You've been spying on us, tracking our private conversations, and God knows what else. Don't insult me by pretending this is normal. Jessica finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Ryan, please. Let's just leave. We're not going anywhere until I get answers, I shot back, glaring at Vincent. He sighed, as if I were a difficult student in one of his lectures. You're upset. That's understandable. But perhaps you should consider the bigger picture. This isn't about surveillance. It's about revealing truths that are often hidden in the shadows. I slammed my fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. Stop talking in circles. What truths? What shadows? If you have something to say, say it. For the first time, Vincent's composed demeanor slipped. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You really want the truth? Yes, I said through gritted teeth. He glanced at Jessica, then back at me. Your wife contacted us first. I froze. What? Vincent gestured toward Jessica. She applied for this retreat months ago. We accepted her because she expressed a desire to reignite the connection in your marriage. All of this, he spread his hands, was for her. I turned to Jessica, my stomach churning. Is that true? She looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. I thought it might help us, she said quietly. Help us? I repeated, my voice rising. By dragging me into this circus without telling me? By working with this guy behind my back? Jessica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I said coldly. She hesitated, then finally said, I felt like you didn't care anymore, Ryan. You're always so distant, so focused on your own world. I thought this retreat would. I don't know, force us to face things. Face things? I laughed bitterly. You mean like your cozy late-night walks with Vincent? That's not what it looks like, she snapped. Then explain it to me. I demanded. Explain why you're sneaking around with him, why you lied about this retreat, why you've been hiding things for months. Jessica's face crumpled, but before she could respond, Vincent stood up. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. This isn't the place for a shouting match. If you want to continue this discussion, I suggest you do it privately. I turned on him, my fists clenched. Don't you dare tell me how to handle my marriage. He didn't flinch. Your emotions are clouding your judgment, Ryan. Take some time to process. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug look off his face, but Jessica grabbed my arm. Please, let's just go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I considered staying, forcing Vincent to answer every question in front of the room. But the defeated look on Jessica's face stopped me. Fine, I said, my voice cold. But this conversation isn't over. Back in our room, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. I paced the floor, my mind racing. You need to start talking, I said. I already told you, she said without looking up. I felt like we were falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. So, you brought me here to be humiliated? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know about the cameras or the files or any of it. I thought we needed something drastic to shake us out of this rut. I stopped pacing, staring at her. And Vincent? What's your excuse for him? She finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Nothing happened. I swear. He was just being friendly. I didn't think it would look. Don't, I interrupted. Don't try to downplay it. I saw the way you looked at him. Jessica stood, her hands clenched into fists. You don't get it, do you? I've been trying to hold this marriage together while you've been coasting along, oblivious. Maybe I liked the attention because, for once, someone noticed me. Her words hit like a slap. So, this is my fault? I said quietly. I didn't say that, she whispered, but the damage was done. I turned toward the door. You know what? I need some air. Ryan, wait. But I didn't stop. I needed to get out of that room before I said something I couldn't take back. The cracks were no longer just beneath the surface. They were wide open, and I wasn't sure we could ever repair them. When I left the room, the cool evening air hit me like a slap in the face. I stood on the estate's stone path, trying to make sense of everything. Jessica had gone behind my back, worked with this manipulative host, Vincent, and still expected me to believe her intentions were pure. For a long time, I'd prided myself on being the rational one in our marriage. The one who avoided impulsive decisions and knee-jerk reactions. But not tonight. Tonight, I wanted blood. I walked aimlessly at first, my thoughts churning. Vincent was the common thread in all this chaos. He was the one orchestrating this retreat, meddling in our marriage, and worming his way into Jessica's trust. He needed to be dealt with, and I intended to do just that. I returned to the main building and slipped into the study, where I'd found the file on us the night before. The door was unlocked. Arrogance on Vincent's part, no doubt. I searched through the desk drawers again, this time with a singular goal: find something that would expose him for the fraud he was. It didn't take long. Tucked beneath a stack of guest profiles was a flash drive labeled Confidential Vincent. I grabbed it, shoved it into my pocket, and quietly left the room. Back in our room, I ignored Jessica's questions and plugged the drive into my laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice wary. "Finding the truth," I replied curtly. Jessica hovered behind me as I opened the first folder. It contained surveillance videos, hours of footage from the estate's hidden cameras. I scrubbed through clips of couples in their rooms, walking the grounds, or sitting in therapy sessions. It was voyeuristic and invasive, exactly the kind of thing Vincent would thrive on. Then I found a folder labeled Jessica Andrews. My hand hesitated on the mouse, but I opened it anyway. Inside were more videos, all of her talking to Vincent in the garden, sitting by herself in the lounge, even mundane moments like eating breakfast. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, glancing back at Jessica. She looked horrified. "I didn't know about any of this, Ryan. I swear." Ignoring her, I opened the next file. It was an email chain between Vincent and someone named M. Archer. "Vincent, Jessica is showing signs of doubt. I'll need more time to build her trust. M. Archer, we don't have time. Push harder. If she resists, shift focus to Ryan. Vincent, understood. We'll adjust strategy." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just a retreat, it was a targeted operation. "What's going on?" Jessica asked, her voice shaking. I spun the laptop around so she could read the emails. "You tell me." Her eyes scanned the screen, widening with every line. "I don't. I didn't. Ryan, I swear I had no idea." "Save it," I snapped, slamming the laptop shut. "You've lied enough already." The next morning, I confronted Vincent. I found him in the dining hall, chatting amiably with another couple. I didn't care about making a scene. "Vincent," I called, my voice cutting through the room. He turned, smiling as though nothing was wrong. "Ah, Ryan. Good morning." I walked straight up to him and held up the flash drive. "Care to explain this?" Vincent's smile faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Bullshit," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You've been spying on us, manipulating us, and God knows what else. And I've got the proof right here." The room fell silent. Other couples stopped eating, their eyes darting between Vincent and me. Vincent raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Ryan, let's discuss this privately." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to hide behind closed doors anymore. Tell everyone here what you're really doing." Jessica entered the room just then, her face pale. She rushed over to me. "Ryan, please don't." "Don't what?" I snapped. "Don't expose the truth? These people deserve to know what kind of scam they've been roped into." Vincent's expression hardened. "Careful, Ryan. Accusations like that can have consequences." "Is that a threat?" I asked, stepping closer. "Enough." Vincent barked, his veneer of charm finally cracking. "Yes, we gather data. Yes, we analyze behavior. But it's all for the purpose of helping couples. Helping couples? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. You're exploiting us. You're using our private lives for some sick experiment. Vincent tried to respond, but one of the other husbands stood up. Wait, is this true? You've been spying on us? Another woman joined in. What about the cameras? Were you recording us without permission? The room erupted into chaos. Couples began shouting questions at Vincent, their anger growing by the second. Vincent tried to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. Later that afternoon, I took things one step further. Using the information from the flash drive, I tracked down the email address of Emma Archer. After a little digging, I discovered it belonged to a private research firm that specialized in behavioral studies. It didn't take much to piece it together. Vincent was working for the firm, using the retreat as a cover to conduct unethical experiments on unsuspecting couples. I forwarded everything I found to the press, along with an anonymous tip about the estate's surveillance practices. By the time Jessica and I were packing to leave, the news was already spreading. Reporters had shown up at the gates, demanding answers. Vincent was nowhere to be found. On the drive home, Jessica was uncharacteristically quiet. So, I said finally, breaking the silence. Care to explain why you trusted a guy like Vincent over your own husband? She stared out the window, her face unreadable. I made a mistake, she said softly. I thought I was helping us, but I didn't realize how far it would go. You didn't realize? I said, my anger bubbling up again. You didn't think to ask questions, to dig deeper before dragging me into this mess? Jessica turned to me, tears brimming in her eyes. I'm sorry, Ryan. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Sorry isn't good enough, I said coldly. Not this time. Her tears fell, but I didn't feel any sympathy. My trust in her was shattered, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned off the car and looked at her. This isn't over. We still have a lot to talk about. She nodded silently, but I wasn't convinced she understood the gravity of what she'd done. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel like I was coming home. I felt like I was stepping into a battlefield. After we returned home, the tension in the air was suffocating. Jessica and I barely spoke to each other. We went through the motions for the kids' dinner, chores, small talk, but there was no warmth, no connection. At night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to be near her. For days, I replayed everything in my head. The lies, the secrecy, the betrayal. The flash drive and Vincent's manipulation were bad enough, but what really gnawed at me was Jessica's role in all of it. How could she decide, on her own, to involve me in something so invasive, so humiliating? And the garden walk. I didn't care what excuses she gave. The images were burned into my mind. Her smiling at Vincent, holding his hand, laughing like they shared some secret. I wasn't a man to let things fester. I needed clarity, closure. I needed to know if the woman I married still existed under all the deceit or if she was someone I didn't know anymore. I waited until the kids were asleep one evening and walked into the living room, where Jessica was curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She muted the show and looked up at me, her face tired and puffy from days of crying. We need to talk, I said, sitting down across from her. She nodded, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. I'm going to ask you some questions, I began, my voice steady. And I need you to be honest with me. No more half-truths. No more dodging. Just the truth. Jessica swallowed hard. Okay. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Did you know about the cameras? No, she said quickly. I didn't. Vincent never mentioned them. I didn't even think something like that could be part of the retreat. I studied her face, searching for any signs of a lie. She seemed sincere, but I'd learned the hard way not to take her words at face value anymore. Why didn't you tell me about the retreat when you first applied? I asked. She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her lap. Because I knew you'd say no. I thought. I thought if I told you everything, you'd brush it off and say it wasn't necessary. Do you hear how messed up that sounds? I said, my voice rising slightly. You decided to go behind my back instead of having an honest conversation with me. That's not how a marriage works, Jessica. She flinched, but I didn't let up. And Vincent, I continued. How did you get so close to him? Don't tell me that walk in the garden was just innocent small talk. I need the truth. Jessica's face crumpled. She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling as she replied. It wasn't what you think. I confided in him because I felt like I couldn't talk to you anymore. Why? I demanded. What about me made you feel like you couldn't talk? Her voice cracked. Because every time I brought up how I felt, how distant we'd become, you brushed it off like it didn't matter. I felt invisible, Ryan. And Vincent, he listened. He made me feel seen. I sat back, her words hitting me like a slap. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell her she was twisting things. But the other part, the one that had been burying my own guilt for years, knew she wasn't entirely wrong. I won't deny that I've been distant, I admitted. But that doesn't excuse what you did. You chose him over me, Jess. You trusted him when you couldn't trust your own husband. It wasn't about trust, she insisted. I just wanted something different. Something that didn't feel so heavy all the time. I laughed bitterly. Heavy? Marriage isn't always sunshine and rainbows. It's work, Jessica. And instead of working with me, you turned to a complete stranger. Her tears fell freely now. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you did, I said bluntly. You hurt me, and you hurt our marriage. And I don't know if we can come back from this. Jessica froze, her eyes wide. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know if I can trust you anymore, I said. And without trust, what's left? The conversation stretched into the night, both of us unloading years of resentment, pain, and disappointment. Jessica admitted to feeling neglected, unloved. I admitted to shutting her out emotionally, to assuming everything was fine because I didn't want to deal with the hard parts of marriage. By the time we were done, we were both exhausted, physically, emotionally, mentally. I don't know how to fix this, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't either, I replied honestly. But I know I can't keep living like this. Something has to change. Jessica nodded slowly. Do you want a divorce? The word hung in the air, heavy and final. I don't know, I admitted. I need time to figure that out. For the next few weeks, we lived in a strange limbo. Jessica tried to make amends, cooking my favorite meals, initiating conversations, even suggesting couples therapy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. I started seeing a therapist on my own, trying to untangle my thoughts and emotions. I realized that while Jessica's actions had been hurtful, they were also a symptom of a deeper issue in our marriage. We'd both stopped trying, both let the relationship drift into autopilot. But recognizing that didn't make the betrayal any easier to stomach. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, Jessica approached me in the guest room. Ryan, she said hesitantly. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About trust. I sat up, wary of where this was going. I know I broke it, she continued. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want to earn it back. I'll do whatever it takes. Her words were sincere, but I felt nothing. No anger, no hope, no love. Just emptiness. I appreciate that, I said quietly. But I don't know if that's enough. Jessica's face crumpled, but she nodded. If you need me to let go, I will. I just want you to be happy, even if that means we can't be together. Her willingness to let me go should have made me feel something. Instead, it solidified the decision I'd been struggling with for weeks. 2 days later, I told Jessica I wanted a separation. I explained that I needed time to figure out who I was outside of our marriage, to heal from everything we'd both been through. She cried, but she didn't argue. Maybe she'd seen this coming. Maybe part of her had already let go too. We told the kids together, framing it as a temporary step to help us both grow. Emma and Liam took it hard, but we promised to keep things as normal as possible for them. As I packed my things and moved into a small apartment across town, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Losing Jessica hurt, but staying with her would have hurt more. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to rebuild not just my life, but myself. And that was enough. The first few weeks after moving out were some of the hardest days of my life. The apartment was small, barely furnished, and quiet in a way that felt oppressive. I'd gone from the daily chaos of a full household to a silence so heavy it seemed to mock me. I didn't even know how to spend my evenings anymore. Without Jessica, without the kids, there was no one to talk to, no one to share the details of my day with. The emptiness forced me to confront myself in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, I had nothing to distract me from my own thoughts. I began asking myself questions I'd been avoiding. Who am I outside of being a husband and a father? Why didn't I see this coming? What part of this disaster was my fault? I started keeping a journal. At first, it felt awkward, like writing to someone who didn't exist. But as the days passed, the words started to flow. I wrote about my anger at Jessica, my guilt over the years I'd spent coasting through our marriage, and the overwhelming sadness I felt for what we'd lost. I wrote about the kids, too, how much I missed their laughter, their arguments, even the chaos of getting them out the door every morning. My time with them was now limited to weekends, and while I cherished those visits, they always felt too short. Jessica and I kept our interactions civil for the kids' sake. We divided holidays and school events, coordinated schedules, and made sure Emma and Liam didn't feel like they were being shuffled between two worlds. On the surface, it was working. But every time I saw Jessica, a part of me wondered if we could have avoided this, if there was a version of our lives where we'd fought harder for each other. One night, after dropping the kids back at her place, I stayed in the car for a moment, watching the light in the living room window. I could see her silhouette as she moved around, tidying up or preparing for the week ahead. It was such a familiar image, but it felt like I was looking at a stranger. For the first time, I let myself accept the truth: the Jessica I'd married no longer existed. Maybe she hadn't existed for years, and I'd just been too blind to notice. Therapy became my anchor. My therapist didn't let me off the hook, which I appreciated. She challenged me to dig deeper, to look beyond Jessica's betrayal and examine my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. "You can blame her all you want," she said during one session. "But blaming her won't help you move forward. What did you contribute to the relationship's decline?" At first, I resisted. I wanted to hold on to my anger, to paint myself as the victim. But as we dug deeper, I realized that my detachment had played a significant role. I'd taken Jessica for granted, assuming she'd always be there, always be content. I'd stopped being curious about her, stopped asking how she was feeling or what she needed. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained why she might have felt so disconnected. "I thought I was a good husband," I admitted one day. "I worked hard, provided for the family, stayed loyal." But maybe that wasn't enough. My therapist nodded. Marriage isn't just about meeting basic obligations. It's about connection. Did you make her feel like she mattered to you? The question stuck with me long after the session ended. Jessica called me one night, about 2 months after I moved out. I wasn't expecting it. Our conversations were usually limited to logistics about the kids. But this time, her voice was soft, hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said. "And I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. "I know I hurt you," she continued. "And I know I can't undo that. But I want you to know I regret it. I regret all of it." "Thank you," I said finally. "I appreciate that." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Do you think we could ever?" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. "I don't think we can. Too much has happened, Jess. I think we're better off apart. She sighed, a sound heavy with sadness and acceptance. Okay. I wanted to hear it from you. That conversation marked a turning point for me. I stopped wondering if we could fix things and started focusing on what came next. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I started going to the gym again, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. I took a cooking class, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself instead of just going through the motions. The kids adjusted to the new arrangement better than I expected. Emma, ever the practical one, seemed to accept it as a fact of life. Liam struggled more, asking questions about why we couldn't all live together again. I was honest with him, age-appropriate, but honest. Sometimes, people grow apart, I told him one night. It doesn't mean we love you or your sister any less. It just means we're trying to find the best way to move forward. He seemed to understand, in his own way. Months turned into a year. The pain of the separation dulled over time, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in ages. I still thought about Jessica, but the thoughts were no longer laced with anger or regret. I ran into Vincent's name in the news once, a short article about his retreat program being shut down after allegations of unethical practices. It gave me a momentary sense of satisfaction, but it didn't linger. He was just a footnote in my story now, not a central character. On the first anniversary of the day I moved out, I went out to dinner with Emma and Liam. We laughed, talked about their school projects and summer plans, and for the first time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. After I dropped them off at Jessica's, I drove home and sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. My life wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what I'd envisioned when I stood at the altar with Jessica all those years ago. But it was mine. And that was enough. I picked up my phone and opened my journal app, typing out one final entry. Today, I realized something important: I'm not broken. I'm rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.